3 words changed everything that night. Hillbilly trash wife. That's what Sterling called me when he thought I couldn't hear him. 25 years of marriage, and I finally understood the truth hidden behind his charming public smile. The evening had started so beautifully. Our anniversary dinner at Bellamy's, the most exclusive restaurant downtown, was Sterling's idea. "Only the best for us, Maeve," he'd said that morning, kissing my forehead before leaving for the office. I'd spent hours preparing, choosing the emerald dress he'd gifted me last Christmas, styling my hair the way he preferred, even wearing the silk headscarf he'd brought from his business trip to Milan. I wanted everything to be perfect. I arrived early at the restaurant, nervous energy making my fingers tap against the polished wooden table. The candlelight caught the diamond on my wedding ring, casting tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. 25 years. A quarter-century of building a life together, creating our company from nothing, raising our beautiful Avery. My mind drifted to our humble beginnings, me fresh from the small farming community where I'd grown up, and Sterling with his business degree and grand ambitions. "Mrs. Holloway, would you like something while waiting?" The waiter's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Just water for now, thank you. My husband should be here shortly." I smiled, glancing at my watch. 6:45. Sterling was 15 minutes late, but that wasn't unusual. Running Holloway Enterprises consumed most of his time these days. At 7:15, I finally spotted him entering the restaurant, his tall figure commanding attention as always. But he wasn't alone. Sienna Frost, our company's newest marketing executive, walked beside him, laughing at something he'd said. Something cold settled in my stomach as I watched them. Sterling's hand lingered at the small of her back a moment too long before they separated. He approached our table while she headed to the bar. "Sorry I'm late, darling." Sterling bent to kiss my cheek, his cologne enveloping me. "Last-minute crisis at work. Sienna's helping me sort through the Henderson account problems." "On our anniversary?" The words slipped out before I could catch them. Sterling's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Business doesn't stop for sentimentality, Maeve. You know that." He sat down, signaling for the waiter. "Besides, she's just having a quick drink before heading back to finish up." "I thought you'd understand." I forced a smile. Of course. 25 years had taught me when to pick my battles. Dinner progressed with Sterling dominating the conversation, talking about their latest acquisition, the expansion plans, the new investors he'd charmed. I nodded and smiled in all the right places, but my attention kept drifting to Sienna at the bar. She was beautiful, young, polished, sophisticated in a way I had never been at her age. The way Sterling glanced in her direction when he thought I wasn't looking told me everything I needed to know. "Excuse me," I said, after our entrees arrived. "I need to visit the ladies' room." The restaurant's restroom was a marvel of marble and gold fixtures. I stood before the mirror, studying my reflection. At 43, I was still attractive, but the years of stress and hard work had left their mark. Fine lines around my eyes, a certain softness beneath my jaw that hadn't been there before. I reapplied my lipstick, adjusted my headscarf, and took a deep breath. As I exited, voices from the small private dining alcove caught my attention. Sterling's voice, and then Sienna's laughter. I froze, my hand still on the bathroom door. "The Henderson account is practically ours," Sterling was saying. "Just need to finalize the paperwork tomorrow." "And she has no idea?" Sienna's voice was soft, conspiratorial. "None. Maeve's always been easy to manage, smart enough to be useful, but naive about the things that really matter. Always just a country girl playing at business." Their laughter mingled, and something inside me shattered silently. "Honestly, bringing her to the Wilsons' gala last month was mortifying," Sterling continued. 25 years and she still doesn't know how to behave in proper society. Did you see how she kept talking about her grandmother's farm? As if anyone cared about growing up with chickens and cornfields. She does seem out of place," Sienna agreed. "But you've been with her so long." "A mistake I'm remedying soon." Sterling's voice dropped lower, but I could still hear every devastating word. Thaddeus has the paperwork ready. Once the Henderson deal closes, I'll have controlling interest in the company. Maeve signed those transfer documents last week without even reading them. By our next anniversary, darling, you won't have to watch from the bar. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Transfer documents? I remembered signing a stack of papers Sterling had presented as routine updates for our insurance policies. Had I really been so trusting? So blind? What about your daughter? Sienna asked. Avery's in London building her own life. She'll understand business is business. Besides, Maeve will get the lake house. More than generous considering she came into this marriage with nothing but dirt under her fingernails. My hands trembled as I backed away from the alcove. Somehow, I made it back to our table without collapsing. My mind raced through years of subtle dismissals, the way Sterling always introduced me as my wife, rather than by my name at business functions, how he constantly corrected my table manners, my pronunciation, my clothing choices. How had I missed it for so long? Sterling returned 5 minutes later, all smiles and anniversary toasts. I played along, raising my glass to 25 years of marriage, all while a cold, hard knot formed in my chest. To us, he said, his eyes never quite meeting mine. To truth, I responded, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. That night, as Sterling slept beside me in our king-sized bed, I stared at the ceiling, tears silently tracking down my temples into my hair. I thought about our beginning, how we'd met when I came to the city for college, determined to escape my small-town destiny. Sterling had been charming, sophisticated, everything I thought I wanted. He told me I had potential, that with his guidance I could be something more than just a farm girl, and I'd believed him, grateful for his interest, his willingness to polish the rough diamond he claimed to see in me. The company had been my idea originally. Using the money from selling my grandmother's farm after she passed, the only inheritance I had, we'd started Holloway Enterprises. I'd worked 80-hour weeks alongside Sterling, building our dream while also raising Avery. Somewhere along the way, Sterling had taken center stage, becoming the face of our success while I handled operations behind the scenes. I'd told myself it was a partnership, that it didn't matter who got the credit. What a fool I'd been. Morning came with a decision. I wouldn't confront Sterling immediately. I needed proof, needed to understand exactly what he was planning. For the first time in 25 years, I would stop being the trusting wife and start being the businesswoman I should have been all along. You're quiet this morning, Sterling remarked over breakfast, not looking up from his phone. Just thinking about last night, I replied truthfully. 25 years is a long time. He responded absently. Don't forget we have dinner with the Hendersons on Thursday. Wear that navy dress I bought you. The emerald makes you look washed out. I nodded, the old familiar hurt mixing with new resolve. Whatever you think best, dear. When he left for work, I went to our home office and began searching. If Thaddeus Mercer was preparing documents, there would be a trail. Sterling had always underestimated me. It was time to use that to my advantage. I might have grown up a country girl, but on Grandma Holloway's farm, I'd learned that sometimes you had to fight to protect what was yours, and I was just getting started. The file cabinet in Sterling's study yielded nothing. His laptop was password protected, of course, but after 25 years of marriage, I knew his patterns. Third attempt, his mother's maiden name, followed by Avery's birth year. The screen unlocked, revealing dozens of neatly organized folders. My hands shook slightly as I clicked through them, scanning for anything related to company transfers or Thaddeus Mercer. A folder labeled He Restructuring caught my eye. Inside were emails between Sterling and Thaddeus discussing what they called the transition. My stomach clenched as I read Thaddeus's detailed explanation of how Sterling could legally transfer controlling interest of Holloway Enterprises away from me. They referenced documents I'd already signed, paperwork that had been disguised as routine business matters. Once these final transfers are complete, Thaddeus had written, she'll have no legal recourse. The timing with the Henderson acquisition is perfect cover. I printed the emails, my mind racing. According to their timeline, I had less than 3 weeks before Sterling's plan would be fully executed. 3 weeks to save everything I'd built. That afternoon, I made my first countermove. I called Judith Barnes, an attorney I'd met through a women's business luncheon years ago. Sterling had dismissed her as too aggressive, which now seemed like the perfect qualification. I need someone discreet, I explained after summarizing my situation. Someone Sterling doesn't know I'm consulting. Come to my office tomorrow, Judith said, her voice calm but determined. Bring everything you have. And Maeve? Set up a separate bank account today, one he doesn't know about. The next morning, I told Sterling I was meeting with a potential new supplier. He barely looked up from his coffee. Just don't commit to anything without running the numbers by me first. Your enthusiasm sometimes overrides your business sense. The familiar, patronizing tone hit differently now. Of course, dear. I know my limitations. Judith's office was in a modest building across town, far from Sterling's usual haunts. She listened without interruption as I laid out everything I'd discovered, examining the emails I'd printed. First thing, she said when I finished, we need to establish the paper trail of your initial investment. You said you used your inheritance to start the company? Yes, $87,000 from selling my grandmother's farm. It was everything I had. And how was the company initially structured? I frowned, trying to remember. Sterling handled all that. He said it made sense to put everything in both our names since we were married. Judith made a note. We'll need to pull the original incorporation documents. Next, these transfer papers you signed recently. We need copies. They're at the office. Sterling keeps all important documents in his private files. Can you access them? I thought about Ruby, Sterling's longtime secretary, who had always been kind to me. Possibly. I'll need a reason to be looking through them. Create one, Judith said simply. In the meantime, I'll file for discovery of all corporate documents as part of a potential marital asset evaluation. If he asks, you know nothing about it. Over the next week, I became a spy in my own life. I recorded conversations with Sterling, careful to get him talking about the company's history. I befriended Sienna Frost, swallowing my pride to invite her to lunch, watching her discomfort as she sat across from the wife of her lover. I casually mentioned our upcoming anniversary party. Sterling's going all out this year, I said, noting how she avoided my eyes. 25 years deserves something special, he says. That's wonderful, she replied, picking at her salad. You must be very proud. Oh, I am. Building something from nothing takes special people. I leaned forward slightly. Did Sterling ever tell you how we started Holloway Enterprises? With money from my grandmother's farm? Confusion flickered across her face. He mentioned something about a family loan, I think. Not a loan. My inheritance. Every penny I had in the world. I smiled, keeping my voice light. Sometimes I think Sterling forgets that part of our story. The seed was planted. I continued gathering information, building my case piece by careful piece. I discovered that Sterling had been systematically transferring small percentages of my ownership to subsidiary companies he fully controlled. The Henderson acquisition was the final step. Once completed, his shell companies would control 51% of Holloway Enterprises. 2 weeks into my investigation, I had my breakthrough. Ruby, Sterling's secretary, called me at home, her voice hushed. Mrs. Holloway? I think you should know. Mr. Holloway asked me to book a meeting room at the Westin for next Thursday afternoon. For him and Mr. Mercer. He specifically said not to put it on his calendar that you can see. My heart pounded. Thank you, Ruby. May I ask why you're telling me this? There was a pause. My mother lost everything in her divorce 30 years ago. Her husband did it through the business they built together. Another pause. I've worked for you both for 15 years. I've seen how he treats you in meetings. That afternoon, I drove to the office when I knew Sterling would be out. Ruby met me at the elevator. "He keeps the transfer documents in his private safe," she said, leading me to Sterling's office. "The combination is Avery's birthday, my daughter's birthday. So like Sterling to use our child as a password while planning to destroy her mother's life." I entered the numbers with steady hands, hearing the satisfying click as the safe door swung open. Inside were folders neatly labeled with project names I didn't recognize. I quickly photographed everything with my phone before selecting the one marked E-Restructure, Final Phase. Back home, I scanned every document and sent them to Judith. Her response came within hours. "We have what we need. The original company documents clearly show your initial investment. These transfers were executed without proper disclosure. Come in tomorrow, and we'll discuss options." That night at dinner, Sterling announced he was planning something special for our anniversary. "I've reserved the entire upper level at Bellamy's," he said, looking pleased with himself. "Invited all our major clients, board members, some key people from the Henderson Group. Thought we'd combine celebrating our marriage with finalizing the biggest deal of our careers." "That sounds wonderful," I replied, picturing the scene. All the most important people in our business and social circles gathered in one place. Perfect. I'm sure it will be a night to remember. "The Henderson deal is going to change everything, Maeve," Sterling continued, his eyes gleaming with ambition. "We're talking international expansion, possibly doubling our market value within 3 years. Truly life-changing," I agreed, and meant it. The next day, Judith outlined my options. "We have 2 approaches. We can file for an emergency injunction to halt all transfers of company assets, citing fraud and non-disclosure. That's the direct approach. And the second option?" A smile touched her lips. "Let him complete his plan, but with one critical modification. These documents he's having you sign. We create our own versions, ones that appear identical, but contain language that actually reverses what he's trying to do." "He'd never sign anything without reading it," I pointed out. "Wouldn't he? If he believed they were the same documents he'd already reviewed? If his trusted lawyer confirmed they were?" I thought about it. "We'd need Thaddeus to be involved. Everyone has leverage points, Maeve. My investigator has discovered that Mr. Mercer has some questionable billing practices. Several clients have been charged for services never rendered." By the following Monday, Thaddeus Mercer was cooperatively terrified. Faced with potential disbarment and criminal charges, he agreed to present Sterling with our modified documents on the day of the Henderson closing, the same day as our anniversary dinner. "He'll sign them," Thaddeus assured us, sweat beading on his forehead in Judith's office. "He never reads the final versions once I've told him they're ready. He trusts me." "Then he's about to learn an expensive lesson about trust," Judith observed. 2 days before our anniversary, I visited Griffin Adair, the president of our local business association and longtime friend of both Sterling and me. Griffin had always treated me with respect, one of the few men in our circle who addressed questions about operations directly to me rather than deferring to Sterling. "I need a favor," I told him over coffee in his office, "one that requires absolute discretion." Griffin studied me with concerned eyes. We'd known each other for nearly 20 years, had served on charitable boards together, attended countless business functions side by side while our spouses circulated. There had never been anything improper between us, but there had always been a mutual respect that sometimes felt like more. "Whatever you need, Maeve. At our anniversary dinner, there might be a situation. If it happens, I need someone objective, someone respected, to be a witness." "A witness to what?" His voice was gentle but concerned. I chose my words carefully. "To the truth about Holloway Enterprises, about who built it, and who's trying to steal it." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "He's making a move against you, isn't he?" When I didn't immediately deny it, he nodded slowly. "I've seen how he dismisses your contributions, Maeve. Always wondered when you'd reach your limit." "Thursday night," I said. "Can I count on you to be there? To simply observe and remember what happens?" He reached across the table and briefly covered my hand with his. "I'll be there." The final piece fell into place the day before our anniversary. Avery called from London, excited about surprising us at the dinner. "I've already booked my flight, Mom. Don't tell Dad. I want to see his face when I walk in." My heart constricted. "Honey, that's wonderful. But there's something you should know before tomorrow." I told my daughter everything. Sterling's betrayal, his affair with Sienna, his plan to steal the company. There was silence on the line when I finished. "Mom," she finally said, her voice tight with emotion, "I've watched him belittle you my entire life. I always wondered why you stayed." "I loved him," I said simply, "and I believed in our family." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to take back what's mine." "Can you still come tomorrow?" "Try to stop me," she replied, and I heard in her voice the steely resolve she'd inherited from me, not her father. That night, I slept in the guest room, claiming a headache. Sterling didn't protest, probably relieved not to maintain the facade of a loving husband. As I lay awake, I thought about the young woman who had left her grandmother's farm 26 years ago, determined to make something of herself. She'd been naive, yes, but also brave and hardworking. Sterling hadn't created me. He'd simply exploited my determination and labor while systematically undermining my confidence. Tomorrow, both Sterling and I would finally meet the woman I was always meant to be. The morning of our anniversary, I received a text from Thaddeus. Document signed. All set. Sterling came down to breakfast, looking pleased with himself, kissing my cheek with unusual affection. "Happy anniversary, darling. Ready for our big night?" I smiled up at him, feeling strangely calm now that everything was in motion. "More than ready. I've been waiting for this day for a very long time." He misunderstood, of course. "The Henderson deal is just the beginning, Maeve. Trust me, our next chapter is going to be amazing." "On that," I said, reaching for my coffee, "we completely agree." The afternoon passed in a blur of preparations. I visited my hairstylist, had my makeup professionally done, and slipped into the dress I'd chosen for the evening. Not the navy one Sterling preferred, but a bold crimson gown I'd purchased secretly weeks ago. The color of power, the color of rebirth. As I fastened my grandmother's antique pearl earrings, the only items I'd kept from my past life, I studied my reflection. The woman looking back at me seemed different somehow, stronger, more certain. My phone buzzed with a text from Judith. "Everything in place. Good luck tonight." Sterling was waiting in the foyer when I descended the stairs, handsome in his tailored black suit. His eyes widened slightly at my appearance. "Red? I thought we discussed the navy dress." "It's our anniversary," I replied smoothly. 25 years deserves something special, don't you think? He frowned, but checked his watch. "We don't have time to argue about it now. The car is waiting." During the drive to Bellamy's, Sterling briefed me as if I were an employee being prepared for a client meeting. "The Hendersons will be seated at our table, along with the Wilsons and the Blackwells. I need you to keep Catherine Henderson engaged while I finalize details with Robert." "Of course," I said, gazing out the window at the city lights. "I know my role." He glanced at me sharply. "Is something wrong? You seem different tonight." I turned to him with a practiced smile. "Just emotional. 25 years is a significant milestone." "Well, pull it together before we arrive. This dinner is about more than our anniversary." "I'm well aware of that, Sterling." The private upper level of Bellamy's had been transformed for the evening. Twinkling lights cascaded from the ceiling. Tables adorned with silver candelabras and white roses surrounded a small dance floor, and at the front of the room stood a gleaming podium. Nearly 100 people had already arrived. Board members, business associates, social connections Sterling had cultivated over decades. Cordelia Holloway, Sterling's mother, approached as soon as we entered. At 76, she remained an imposing figure in her midnight blue gown and perfectly coiffed silver hair. "Sterling, Maeve," she greeted us, her eyes lingering on my dress with subtle disapproval. "Quite the celebration you've arranged." Nothing but the best for our 25th, Sterling replied, accepting kisses on both cheeks from his mother. The Hendersons haven't arrived yet, have they? Not yet. Cordelia turned to me. 25 years. I remember when Sterling first brought you home. So provincial. But you've certainly adapted well enough. The familiar backhanded compliment barely registered. After tonight, Cordelia's opinion of me would be the least of my concerns. Thank you for coming, Cordelia, I said simply. Your presence means a great deal. Sterling was immediately pulled away by colleagues, leaving me to circulate among guests who had come more for the business networking than to celebrate our marriage. I spotted Sienna near the bar, looking uncomfortable in a silver cocktail dress. Our eyes met briefly before she looked away. I wondered if she knew what was coming. Maeve, Griffin Adair appeared at my side, distinguished in his gray suit. You look stunning tonight. Thank you for being here, I said quietly. He nodded almost imperceptibly. Everything set? Yes. When Sterling makes his announcement about the Henderson acquisition, that's when it will happen. I'll be watching. The Hendersons arrived, triggering a flurry of attention. Robert Henderson, CEO of Henderson Global, was the prize Sterling had been pursuing for months. The acquisition would nearly double Holloway Enterprises' market reach, the crowning achievement of Sterling's career. Or so he thought. Dinner was served, course after elegant course that I barely tasted. I played my part perfectly, engaging Catherine Henderson with questions about their recent trip to Tuscany, complimenting Jacqueline Wilson's new jewelry line, laughing at William Blackwell's predictable jokes. All the while, I watched the minute hand of the ornate wall clock inch toward 9 o'clock, the time Sterling had scheduled for his big announcement. Avery arrived during the main course, causing a stir as she made her entrance in a sleek black dress, her London sophistication evident in every movement. Sterling's face registered genuine surprise and pleasure. My darling girl. He stood to embrace her. Why didn't you tell us you were coming? And miss your big night? Never. Avery kissed his cheek before turning to embrace me. You look beautiful, Mom, she whispered in my ear, and absolutely terrifying. I squeezed her hand. Stay close. At precisely 9 o'clock, Sterling clinked his glass and moved to the podium. The room quieted as he surveyed his audience with the confident smile of a man at the height of his power. Friends, colleagues, esteemed guests, thank you for joining Maeve and me on this special evening. He gestured toward me, and I inclined my head graciously. 25 years ago, I married a woman who had potential. A diamond in the rough, you might say. Appreciative chuckles rippled through the room. I maintained my smile, though my hands clenched beneath the tablecloth. Over the years, I've built something significant. A company that stands as one of the leading enterprises in our industry. The deliberate I wasn't lost on me, nor on Avery, whose posture stiffened beside me. Sterling continued, Tonight, I'm proud to announce that Holloway Enterprises is expanding in an unprecedented way. Robert Henderson and I have finalized the details of a historic merger between our companies. Applause broke out. Sterling raised his glass. I'd like to propose a toast to new beginnings, expanded horizons, and the future of Holloway Enterprises under its new structure. This was it, my moment. I stood slowly, my crimson dress catching the light as I moved toward the podium. Sterling's expression flickered with annoyance at the interruption. If I might add something to my husband's toast, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room. Surprise registered on many faces. I rarely spoke at these functions. Sterling's smile tightened. Of course, darling. Briefly, though, we have the contracts to sign. I reached the podium and turned to face the assembled guests. 25 years is indeed a milestone worth celebrating. It represents a quarter-century of building, growing, and learning important truths. I paused, meeting Sterling's increasingly wary gaze. One truth being the actual history of Holloway Enterprises. The room quieted further. I could feel every eye upon me. Many of you know the company's origin story as Sterling has told it over the years, but tonight, I'd like to share the complete version. I smiled, watching unease creep into Sterling's expression. Holloway Enterprises began with $87,000, the entire proceeds from the sale of my grandmother's farm in rural Pennsylvania. Every penny I had in the world. Sterling moved toward me, his public smile still fixed in place. Maeve, this isn't the time for sentimentality. It's exactly the time for truth, Sterling. I held my ground, turning back to the audience. What many of you don't know is that the original incorporation documents listed me as the majority shareholder, a fact my husband has spent years attempting to obscure and, most recently, to illegally change. Murmurs spread through the room. Sterling reached the podium, his hand closing around my arm. "You're embarrassing yourself," he hissed through his smile. "We'll discuss this at home." I pulled free of his grip. "Actually, we'll discuss it right here. You see, I've recently discovered some fascinating documents." I nodded to Avery, who approached with a leather portfolio, including evidence of my husband's systematic attempt to transfer company ownership away from me through fraudulent means. The murmuring grew louder. I could see Robert Henderson leaning forward with intense interest, his wife whispering in his ear. Cordelia Holloway's face had gone pale. "Maeve, that's enough." Sterling's voice had hardened, his public persona slipping. "You clearly don't understand the legal complexities." "Oh, but I do." I opened the portfolio Avery handed me. "In fact, I understand them so well that when you signed what you thought were the final transfer documents this morning, you actually signed these." I held up a stack of papers. Legally binding documents that not only restore my original ownership percentage, but transfer additional shares to me in compensation for attempted fraud. Sterling's face drained of color. "What are you talking about? Thaddeus verified those documents." "Yes, he did. After my attorney explained to him the serious ethical and criminal implications of participating in your scheme." I smiled. "It seems Thaddeus values his law license more than your friendship, darling." Shock rippled visibly through the assembled guests. Griffin Adair stepped forward from the crowd. "As president of the Business Association and a notary public, I can confirm that I witnessed the filing of these restoration documents this afternoon," he announced. "They appear entirely legal and properly executed." Sterling's composure finally cracked. "This is absurd. You can't just—" "Can't what, Sterling? Protect what's legally mine? Prevent my husband from stealing a company I built with my inheritance and 25 years of my labor?" My voice remained steady, though my heart hammered in my chest. "But I'm not finished yet." I nodded to Avery again, who pressed a button on her phone. The room's speakers crackled to life, and Sterling's voice filled the space. "Once these transfers are complete, she'll have nothing. 25 years of putting up with her country manners and embarrassing stories about farm life will finally pay off." A woman's voice, clearly Sienna's, responded, "What about the company itself? She works there every day." Sterling's recorded laugh was coldly dismissive. "She's been signing away her rights for months without even reading the documents. The company was built on her inheritance, sure, but I've been the brains since day one. Without me, she'd still be shoveling manure in Pennsylvania." Gasps echoed through the room. I let the recording continue, revealing in excruciating detail Sterling's plan to take the company, divorce me, and start a new life with Sienna, who, I noticed, was now edging toward the exit. When I finally silenced the playback, the room had gone deathly quiet. Sterling stood frozen, his carefully constructed public image shattered beyond repair. "You recorded me?" he finally managed, disbelief etched in every feature. "You spied on me?" "I protected myself," I corrected, "something I should have done years ago." I turned back to the stunned audience. "I've always been proud of my rural origins, even as my husband mocked them. The lessons I learned growing up taught me persistence, integrity, and the value of hard work, qualities that built Holloway Enterprises from nothing." I straightened my shoulders. "As of this morning, I am once again the majority owner and chief executive of the company. My first official act in this restored capacity is to terminate Sterling Holloway's employment, effective immediately." The silence broke into an uproar. Robert Henderson rose from his seat, signaling for his team to follow him toward the exit. Board members huddled in urgent conversation. Cordelia Holloway sat motionless, staring at her son with undisguised shock. Sterling grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. "You can't do this to me," he growled, all pretense abandoned. "You're nothing without me. Nothing but a hillbilly with delusions of grandeur. Take your hand off my mother." Avery's voice cut like steel as she stepped between us. "Or the next recording going public will be of you assaulting her at your anniversary dinner." He released me, looking wildly around at the witnesses to his downfall. "This isn't over, Maeve. You have no idea what you've done." "I know exactly what I've done," I replied calmly. "I've reclaimed what was always mine." As security personnel approached, alerted by Griffin, Sterling backed away. "You'll regret this," he threatened. "All of you will regret this night." I watched him retreat, surrounded by whispers and stares, no longer the respected business titan, but a man exposed for his true nature. Beside me, Avery squeezed my hand. "Are you okay, Mom?" I took a deep breath, feeling decades of tension begin to release. "I will be." Cordelia approached us slowly, her aristocratic features composed, but her eyes troubled. She studied me for a long moment before speaking. "I've underestimated you for 25 years, Maeve Holloway." She glanced toward the exit where Sterling had disappeared. "And perhaps overestimated my son. He learned his values somewhere, Cordelia," I replied quietly. She flinched slightly but nodded. "Perhaps so, but unlike him, I can recognize when I've been wrong." She straightened her shoulders. "What happens to the company now?" "It continues," I said simply, "under proper leadership." As Cordelia moved away, Griffin approached. "Quite an anniversary celebration," he observed, his eyes warm with admiration. "What will you do about the Henderson acquisition?" "Renegotiate," I replied without hesitation. "As equals this time, not as a hostile takeover disguised as a merger." He nodded approvingly. "If you need any assistance in the transition, I'll call you," I finished, offering a genuine smile for perhaps the first time that evening. "Thank you, Griffin, for everything." As guests began to depart, some avoiding my eyes, others approaching with newfound respect to offer awkward congratulations, I found myself standing with Avery in the center of the room that had witnessed my reclamation of power. "I can't believe you pulled this off," my daughter said, shaking her head in amazement. "You've been planning this for months, haven't you?" 6 weeks, I corrected, ever since I overheard him with Sienna that night. I gazed around the emptying room. 25 years of marriage ended in 25 minutes. Avery slipped her arm through mine. "Not ended, Mom. Transformed into something better." I thought about the difficult days ahead, the legal battles Sterling would surely wage, the company restructuring, the personal adjustments to my new reality. But for the first time in decades, I felt truly free. The country girl who had left her grandmother's farm had finally found her true strength, not by denying her origins, but by embracing them. "You know," I told Avery as we walked toward the exit, "your great-grandmother always said the strongest trees have the deepest roots." I think I'm finally beginning to understand what she meant. Outside, the night air felt clean and new against my skin. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but tonight, standing tall in my crimson dress, I was simply Maeve Holloway, no longer defined by my husband, but by my own resilience and determination. And that was more than enough. The morning after the anniversary dinner dawned with an eerie quietness in the Holloway mansion. Sterling hadn't come home. According to Avery, who had monitored social media with hawk-like vigilance, he had checked into the Grand Windsor Hotel downtown. The news of our public confrontation had already begun circulating through business circles, with my phone buzzing constantly with messages from colleagues, board members, and curious acquaintances. "You need to get to the office early," Avery advised over coffee in our sunlit kitchen. She looked remarkably composed despite the drama of the previous night. "Establish your presence before Sterling tries something else." I nodded, studying my daughter's determined expression. "When did you become so strategic?" "I learned from the best," she replied with a small smile. "Just not the parent I thought was the best." We arrived at Holloway Enterprises headquarters by 7:30. The security guard's eyes widened when he saw me stride through the lobby. Avery and Judith Barnes flanking me like generals accompanying their commander. "Good morning, Kevin," I greeted him warmly. "Please notify all department heads that I'll be holding an emergency meeting at 9 o'clock in the main conference room." "Yes, Mrs. Holloway," he responded, clearly confused by my authoritative tone. The executive floor was nearly empty this early, but Ruby was already at her desk outside Sterling's, no, my office. She stood as we approached, her face a mixture of anxiety and resolve. "Mrs. Holloway, I've already had several calls from board members this morning, and Mr. Holloway called 10 minutes ago. He said he'll be arriving at 8 with Mr. Mercer." "Thank you, Ruby." I glanced at the large corner office that had always been Sterling's domain. "Has anything been removed from the office?" "No, ma'am. I've been here since 6:30. She hesitated before adding, "I want you to know I'm with you, Mrs. Holloway. Many of us are." The simple statement of loyalty touched me unexpectedly. "That means more than you know, Ruby." I turned to Judith. "Let's get started." Inside the office, we moved quickly. Judith began documenting everything, while Avery photographed documents. I sat at Sterling's desk, my desk now, and accessed the company servers using the emergency administrator credentials I'd obtained from our IT director the previous week. "We need to secure everything before Sterling arrives," I explained as my fingers flew over the keyboard. "Financial records, client contracts, pending deals, especially the Henderson acquisition documents." "Mom," Avery called from the credenza, "there's a hidden safe behind this painting." I smiled grimly. "Combination is 52314. At her questioning look, I added, "The date we incorporated Holloway Enterprises." Sterling always did have a flair for symbolic gestures. The safe contained what I expected: additional transfer documents, offshore account information, and a thumb drive labeled personal. I handed everything to Judith, who tucked them into her briefcase without comment. By 8:15, we had secured the essential records, and I had sent emails to all board members requesting their presence at an emergency meeting. Sterling was uncharacteristically late, a small victory that I savored as I settled into the leather executive chair and surveyed the office that would now be mine. The confrontation, when it came, was as explosive as I'd anticipated. Sterling burst through the door at 8:35, Thaddeus Mercer trailing behind him looking pale and disheveled. Sterling froze when he saw me seated behind his desk. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his normally perfect appearance noticeably rumpled. He hadn't shaved, and his eyes were bloodshot. "Good morning, Sterling," I replied calmly. "I'm preparing for the board meeting at 9. You're welcome to attend, of course, but as a former employee, rather than CEO." His face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. You can't just walk in and take over based on some manipulated documents and illegal recordings." Judith stepped forward. "The documents are legally binding, Mr. Holloway. As for the recordings, they were made in public spaces where there is no expectation of privacy. Your attempt to fraudulently transfer company ownership, however, is definitely illegal." Sterling turned on Thaddeus. Tell them those documents are invalid." Thaddeus avoided Sterling's gaze. "I've reviewed everything carefully, Sterling. Mrs. Holloway's documents are properly executed and filed. My involvement in the previous transfers was ill-advised." "You spineless bastard," Sterling spat. "After everything I've done for you, including asking me to commit fraud," Thaddeus interrupted, finding a shred of dignity. "I've already provided Mrs. Holloway's attorney with a full statement detailing your instructions to me." Sterling's composure crumbled further. He turned back to me, desperation edging into his voice. Maeve, be reasonable. We can work this out privately. There's no need to destroy everything we've built over one misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Is that what you call systematically attempting to steal my company while planning to leave me for a younger woman? An interesting definition. It wasn't like that, he insisted, adopting the persuasive tone that had worked on me for decades. The restructuring was for tax purposes, and Sienna was a mistake, a moment of weakness. Recorded conversations suggesting otherwise have already been provided to the board, I informed him. But nice try with the gaslighting. It's worked for 25 years, hasn't it? His expression hardened. You won't get away with this. The board won't accept you as CEO. You don't have the experience, the connections, the what, Sterling? The education? I have an MBA, same as you. The business acumen? I've been running operations for 2 decades while you played golf with clients. The leadership skills? I stood, placing my palms flat on the desk. Or is it just that I don't have the right genitalia and the right upbringing? Avery made a choking sound that might have been suppressed laughter. Sterling's gaze snapped to her. And you, he said bitterly, my own daughter, conspiring against me. I chose the parent who deserved my loyalty, Avery replied coolly, the one who never belittled me or treated me as an accessory to her ambitions. A knock at the door interrupted us. Ruby poked her head in. Mrs. Holloway, the board members are assembling in the conference room, and Mr. Henderson is on line 1. Thank you, Ruby. I picked up the phone, maintaining eye contact with Sterling. Robert, good morning. Yes, I'm looking forward to discussing our potential collaboration under the new leadership structure. 9:30 works perfectly. See you then. I replaced the receiver and gathered my portfolio. The Henderson deal isn't dead, Sterling. It's just being renegotiated by the actual owner of Holloway Enterprises. I moved around the desk toward the door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a board meeting to lead. This isn't over, Sterling warned, his voice low and dangerous. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I paused at the threshold. That's where you're wrong. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A man who married a country girl for her inheritance, spent 25 years undermining her confidence while exploiting her labor, and then tried to discard her when he thought he'd squeezed out every possible benefit. I smiled without warmth, but that country girl remembered something important. On the farm, we know how to clean up manure and recognize predators. The board meeting was every bit as challenging as I'd expected. 8 men and 2 women, most of whom had been Sterling's golfing partners for years, sat around the polished conference table, their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. With Judith beside me and Avery observing from the corner, I laid out the facts: the original ownership structure, Sterling's systematic fraud, and the legally binding documents that had restored my position. I provided copies of incorporation papers, transfer records, and Thaddeus Mercer's sworn statement. This is highly irregular, commented Walter Blackwell, the longest-serving board member. Sterling has been the face of this company for decades. The face? Yes, I agreed, but not the foundation, nor the backbone. Those have always been mine. What experience do you have in leading an organization of this size? Asked Miranda Powell, her tone more curious than confrontational. I've directed operations for 20 years, I replied confidently. I've managed our largest client relationships, overseen product development, and handled crisis management, while Sterling focused on expansion and public relations. Can you maintain the client relationships Sterling established? Another board member challenged. Many of those relationships began with me, I pointed out. Sterling was the handshake, but I was the delivery. Ask any of our long-term clients who they called when problems needed solving. The questions continued for nearly an hour. I answered each one directly, without defensiveness or apology. Finally, Walter Blackwell leaned back in his chair. I've known Sterling for 30 years, he said slowly. Always thought he was the driving force behind Holloway Enterprises. It appears I may have been misinformed. By the meeting's end, the board had grudgingly acknowledged my legal right to assume leadership, though several members remained visibly uncomfortable with the dramatic change. I didn't need their enthusiasm, only their compliance. The rest would come with time and results. As the board members filed out, Robert Henderson entered, his expression revealing nothing about his thoughts regarding the previous night's spectacle. "Maeve," he greeted me, extending his hand. "Quite a development." "Robert," I responded, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you for coming. I imagine you have questions about the acquisition." He smiled slightly. "More like concerns about stability during this transition. The deal Sterling proposed was aggressive, heavily weighted in Holloway's favor." "I'm aware," I replied, "which is why I'd like to propose a more equitable arrangement, one that creates a true strategic partnership rather than a thinly veiled takeover." His eyebrows rose. "I'm listening." For the next hour, Robert and I renegotiated the framework of the acquisition. By the time he left, we had established the groundwork for a deal that would benefit both companies without sacrificing Henderson's autonomy, and secured his support for my leadership in the process. Exhausted but triumphant, I returned to my new office to find Avery waiting with lunch ordered from my favorite deli. "The country girl cleans up," she said with a grin, unpacking sandwiches. "I just checked social media. The business community is buzzing about the Holloway coup, as they're calling it." I sank into my chair. "Any mention of Sienna?" "She's apparently taken a sudden leave of absence from the company. Dad's getting roasted for the affair angle as much as the attempted fraud." I unwrapped my sandwich, suddenly ravenous. "And how do you feel about all this? He's still your father." Avery's expression sobered. "He's the man who tried to destroy my mother and steal her company. That changes things." She picked at her food. "I always knew he was controlling with you, but I never realized how calculated it was, how he systematically undermined you while taking credit for your work." "I let him," I admitted quietly. "For too long, I believed his narrative about me, that I was lucky he'd civilized me, that my rural background was something to be ashamed of, rather than the source of my strength. What changed?" I thought about that night at Bellamy's, hearing Sterling call me hillbilly trash wife when he thought I couldn't hear. I finally saw him clearly, and once I did, I began to see myself clearly too. The office phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Ruby's voice came through the speaker. "Mrs. Holloway, your mother-in-law is here to see you." I exchanged surprised glances with Avery. "Send her in." Cordelia Holloway entered the office with her characteristic regal bearing, though her eyes betrayed her unease. She nodded to Avery before fixing her gaze on me. "I see you've wasted no time claiming your throne," she observed, gesturing to the office. "Reclaiming what was always mine," I corrected. "What can I do for you, Cordelia?" She sighed, suddenly looking every one of her 76 years. "I've spent the morning speaking with board members and reviewing some of the evidence you presented. It appears my son has," she paused, searching for words, "conducted himself dishonorably." The admission clearly cost her. I offered no response, waiting. "Sterling called me this morning," she continued. "He wanted me to use my influence with the board to support his version of events." Her lips thinned. I declined. "That must have been difficult," I said neutrally. "Not as difficult as acknowledging that I raised a man capable of such deceit." She met my eyes directly. "Or recognizing my own role in how he treated you." The acknowledgement, however oblique, was unexpected. For 25 years, Cordelia had subtly reinforced Sterling's narrative about my rural background, her disapproval evident in every arched eyebrow and dismissive comment. "Why are you here, Cordelia?" I asked. "To offer you something Sterling never did. Respect." She straightened her shoulders. "And to ask if you intend to use his crimes to destroy the Holloway name completely." I understood her concern. The family reputation was everything to Cordelia. "I have no interest in scandal for scandal's sake," I assured her. My focus is securing the company and moving forward. Relief flickered across her face. Then perhaps something positive may yet emerge from this unfortunate situation. She glanced around the office. You know, you've always reminded me of someone. My own mother. She came from humble beginnings too. My father's family never let her forget it. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. She had your same stubborn strength. With that unexpected revelation, Cordelia nodded once more and left, her dignified posture never faltering. Well, that was something, Avery commented when the door closed. Indeed. I turned back to my computer. Now, let's get back to work. We have a company to run. By late afternoon, word had spread throughout Holloway Enterprises that a major leadership change had occurred. Employees gathered in small groups, whispering and speculating. When I walked through the main work areas, conversations hushed momentarily before resuming with increased intensity. I called an all-staff meeting for 4:30, standing before hundreds of employees in our largest conference space. Many looked confused, some concerned, others openly curious. By now, you've heard rumors about changes in leadership, I began, my voice steady. I want to address those directly. As of today, I have assumed the role of Chief Executive Officer of Holloway Enterprises. Sterling Holloway is no longer affiliated with the company. The murmurs grew louder. I raised a hand for quiet. Some of you have worked primarily with Sterling over the years. Others have worked more closely with me. All of you deserve to know that this company, which I founded with my inheritance 25 years ago, remains strong and stable. Our mission hasn't changed. Our commitment to excellence hasn't wavered. I paused, scanning the faces before me. What has changed is recognition of who we truly are and what we value. This company was built on hard work, integrity, and perseverance. Values I learned growing up on a farm in rural Pennsylvania. Values I will never again apologize for or hide. By the time I finished speaking, the mood had shifted from uncertainty to cautious optimism. As employees filed out, many approached to offer support or share stories of their own interactions with Sterling that suddenly made more sense in light of recent revelations. When I finally left the office that evening, exhausted but resolute, Griffin Adair was waiting in the lobby. I thought you might need a friendly face after your first day as official CEO, he said, falling into step beside me. How did you know I'd still be here this late? He smiled. Because I know you're determined to prove something to every person who ever doubted you, especially yourself. His perception was startling in its accuracy. Well, I'm certainly not going home anytime soon. Sterling's being escorted by security to collect his personal belongings from the house tomorrow. Until then, Avery and I are staying at a hotel. Have dinner with me, Griffin suggested as we reached the building entrance. Nothing romantic, he added quickly. Just two business associates discussing the day's developments. I hesitated, then nodded. I'd like that. Just let me text Avery. Over dinner at a quiet restaurant far from our usual business haunts, Griffin and I talked for hours. About the company, about the years of working in Sterling's shadow, about the future stretching before me now. I always knew you were the real talent, Griffin confessed over dessert. The way you solved problems, anticipated issues, connected with people. It was obvious to anyone paying attention. Except to me, I said ruefully. I believed his narrative for so long. What will you do now? About the divorce, I mean. I considered the question. File immediately. My attorney is already preparing the paperwork. Sterling won't make it easy, but the evidence of his fraud and infidelity gives me significant leverage. Griffin nodded thoughtfully. And the company? Expand thoughtfully. Nurture the Henderson partnership. Build something that reflects my values, not just my ambition. I smiled. Maybe even open a division focused on supporting rural entrepreneurs. Reclaiming your roots, he observed. Embracing them, I corrected. They're the source of my strength, something Sterling never understood. As Griffin drove me to the hotel later, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in decades. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Sterling's retaliation, skeptical clients, the ongoing work of transforming the company. But for the first time in 25 years, I would face those challenges as myself. Maeve Holloway, a woman who had finally remembered who she was and where she came from. And that woman was unstoppable. 6 months passed with the swiftness of seasons changing. Autumn gave way to winter, and winter to the first tentative buds of spring. Holloway Enterprises underwent its own transformation during those months, not just in leadership, but in culture and direction. The divorce proceedings had been ugly, but swift. Sterling's attempt to claim half the company assets crumbled when faced with the documented evidence of fraud and the original incorporation papers showing my inheritance as the founding capital. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, had been particularly unimpressed by Sterling's attempts to portray himself as the business genius behind our success. From the evidence presented, she had stated during her ruling, it appears Mr. Holloway's primary talent was taking credit for his wife's work, while systematically undermining her confidence. The court finds in favor of Mrs. Holloway on all counts. Sterling had stormed from the courtroom, his new attorney trailing behind him. Thaddeus Mercer had testified against him, his career damaged but not destroyed by his cooperation with my legal team. In the end, Sterling received only what I chose to give him: a fair but hardly generous settlement that included the lake house and enough money to maintain a comfortable lifestyle, though nothing approaching his former wealth. "You're being too generous," Avery had argued when I outlined the settlement terms. "After what he did, he deserves nothing." "This isn't about what he deserves," I'd explained. "It's about who I choose to be. I won't allow his actions to turn me into someone motivated by vengeance." The company flourished under my leadership. The Henderson Partnership, renegotiated on equitable terms, had exceeded projections for the first 2 quarters. Employee morale improved dramatically once Sterling's toxic influence was removed, with productivity increasing by 23%. I made other changes too. The company logo was redesigned to incorporate subtle elements of wheat and open fields, a nod to my rural roots that now featured prominently in our brand story. The executive team, once predominantly male, now included talented women who had previously been overlooked for advancement. And every month I hosted origin story lunches where employees shared their backgrounds and paths to Holloway Enterprises, celebrating the diversity of experiences that enriched our company. On a personal level, the changes were even more profound. I sold the mansion Sterling and I had shared, purchasing instead a light-filled penthouse downtown with views of both the city skyline and the distant mountains. I redecorated in warm earth tones, displaying for the first time family photographs from my childhood and artifacts from my grandmother's farm, items Sterling had banished to storage decades ago. My relationship with Griffin had evolved gradually from friendship to something deeper. We took things slowly, both of us carrying scars from our pasts. His gentle patience and unwavering respect helped heal wounds I hadn't even realized were still raw. Unlike Sterling, Griffin never attempted to mold me into someone else's vision of perfection. He seemed genuinely fascinated by my rural upbringing, often asking questions about farm life and the values it had instilled. "I can see it in how you run the company," he commented one evening as we shared dinner on my terrace. "The practicality, the focus on sustainability, the way you value every person's contribution. Those are farm values." Sterling saw those qualities as limitations, I mused, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. He spent years trying to erase any trace of the country girl he married. Griffin reached across the table to take my hand. I'm grateful he failed. Avery had returned to London briefly to complete her final projects, but came back to join the company as our new international relations director. Her youth and global perspective balanced my experience and local connections, creating a powerful leadership dynamic that impressed even our most traditional clients. "Quite the formidable team, you Holloway women," Robert Henderson had observed during a recent board meeting. Sterling never mentioned his daughter's business acumen. Sterling never recognized women's abilities unless they were serving his interests. I'd replied with a smile that held no bitterness, only clarity. My relationship with Cordelia Holloway had undergone perhaps the most surprising evolution. After our confrontation in my office, she had maintained a dignified distance for several weeks before reaching out with an unexpected invitation to tea at her home. "I've been reflecting on my role in enabling Sterling's behavior," she had admitted, as we sat in her immaculate sunroom. "Not just toward you, but throughout his life. I believed I was protecting the family name by upholding certain standards. Instead, I created a man who valued appearance over substance." Her humility had touched me. Over the months, our relationship had gradually transformed from mutual tolerance to genuine respect. Cordelia began sharing stories of her own mother's struggles as a woman from humble origins marrying into wealth. Stories that paralleled my experience with Sterling in uncomfortable ways. "The difference," Cordelia noted during one of our conversations, "is that you found your strength before it was too late. My mother never did." Today marked exactly 6 months since the anniversary dinner that had changed everything. I stood at the window of my office, no longer Sterling's office redecorated, but a new space I'd created on the top floor with walls of windows and living plants that reminded me of growing things and open skies. A knock at the door preceded Ruby's entrance. "The quarterly reports are ready for your review, Mrs. Holloway, and Mr. Adair called to confirm your dinner reservation for 7:30. "Thank you, Ruby." I smiled at the woman who had been such a quiet ally during the darkest days. "And please, after all we've been through, I think you can call me Maeve." She returned the smile with a warmth that still surprised me. "Yes, Maeve. By the way, there's a situation downstairs you might want to address personally." I raised an eyebrow at her enigmatic tone. "What kind of situation?" "Sterling is in the lobby. He's asking to see you." My stomach tightened instinctively. Despite the legal victories and professional successes, the thought of facing Sterling still triggered an emotional response I was working to overcome. Did he say why? No, just that it's important and personal. Ruby hesitated. "Security is prepared to remove him if you prefer not to meet." I considered the options. 6 months ago, I might have avoided the confrontation, still carrying the deep-seated fear of Sterling's manipulation. But I was different now. "Tell security I'll be down." "And Ruby, thank you for always having my back." She nodded, her expression reflecting understanding beyond words. The main lobby of Holloway Enterprises featured a wall of windows overlooking a small garden courtyard, filling the space with natural light. As I descended the central staircase, I spotted Sterling immediately. His once commanding presence now somehow diminished despite his still impeccable appearance. He turned as I approached, and I was struck by the subtle changes in him. He had lost weight, and fine lines that hadn't been there 6 months ago bracketed his mouth. His eyes, however, held the same calculating assessment I remembered all too well. "Maeve," he greeted me, his voice carrying the practiced charm that had once made my heart race. "Thank you for seeing me. What can I do for you, Sterling?" I kept my tone professional, conscious of the employees and visitors watching our interaction with barely disguised curiosity. "Could we speak somewhere private?" He glanced around at our audience. "What I have to say isn't for public consumption." I hesitated, old caution warring with new confidence. "My office, then." Briefly, as we rode the elevator in silence, I studied his reflection in the polished doors. There had been a time when this man had been my entire world, when his approval had been the measure of my worth. That time felt like another lifetime now, belonging to another woman. In my office, Sterling took in the changes with poorly concealed surprise. "You've been busy," he observed, running his fingers along the edge of my sustainable bamboo desk. "Quite the transformation." Why are you here, Sterling? I remained standing, maintaining both physical and emotional distance. He sighed, dropping the pretense of casual conversation. I'm leaving the country, taking a position with a firm in Dubai. This was unexpected. Congratulations, I said neutrally. But I don't see why this concerns me. Because despite everything, we were married for 25 years. He met my eyes directly. I thought you deserved to hear it from me, rather than through business gossip. I studied him, trying to discern his true motivation. Sterling never did anything without calculation. That's considerate. But again, why does this matter to me? He moved to the window, gazing out at the city we had both conquered in different ways. I've had a lot of time to think these past months, about what happened, about my choices. And, I prompted when he fell silent, and I've realized that I lost more than money and status when you exposed me. He turned back to face me. I lost the one person who always believed in me, even when I gave you every reason not to. The words might have moved me once. Now they simply confirmed how fundamentally Sterling misunderstood what had happened between us. I didn't believe in you, Sterling. I believed in us. In the partnership I thought we had. You're the one who betrayed that. He flinched slightly, but pressed on. I know I hurt you. I know I tried to take what was rightfully yours. But is there no possibility of, not reconciliation, but at least forgiveness? The question hung in the air between us. 6 months ago, I might have raged at him, might have listed every slight and betrayal from our 25 years together. But the woman I had become had no need for such displays. I forgave you months ago, Sterling, I said quietly, not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying anger serves no purpose, except to keep me tethered to the past. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something that might have been genuine remorse. I didn't expect that. You never really knew me, I replied without rancor. You were too busy trying to remake me into someone else. He didn't deny it. After a moment, he reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. There's one more thing. I found these when I was clearing out my mother's attic. I thought you might want them. I accepted the envelope cautiously. Inside were photographs, faded color snapshots from our early days together. Me standing proudly before our first tiny office space, both of us holding infant Avery. A candid shot of me laughing, my head thrown back in uninhibited joy, from before I learned to modulate my expressions to meet Sterling's standards of propriety. I'd forgotten how you used to laugh, Sterling said softly. Before I taught you, it was too loud, too unrefined. The observation was startling in its self-awareness. I studied the young woman in the photograph, her natural confidence not yet eroded by years of subtle criticism, her connection to her authentic self still intact. Thank you for these, I said, returning them to the envelope. They're a good reminder of who I was before I started believing your narrative about me. Sterling nodded, accepting the implicit rebuke. For what it's worth, Maeve, you've proven me wrong in every possible way. The company is thriving under your leadership. Even my mother sings your praises now. I'm not interested in proving you wrong, Sterling. I'm interested in living authentically, something I forgot how to do during our marriage. He moved toward the door, then paused. One last thing. I saw Griffin Adair's car outside your building last week. Are you two? My personal life is no longer your concern, I replied firmly. But yes, Griffin and I are building something genuine together. A flash of something. Jealousy. Regret crossed his face before he nodded. He's a better man than I was, than I am. It's not about better or worse. It's about respect. About valuing someone for who they are, not who you want them to be. Sterling absorbed this, his expression unreadable. I wish you happiness, Maeve. Truly. I wish you self-awareness, Sterling. It's the beginning of growth. After he left, I remained at the window, watching as he crossed the courtyard below and disappeared into a waiting car. There was no emotional upheaval, no lingering pain or anger, just a sense of closure that had been a long time coming. My phone chimed with a text message from Griffin. Just confirming dinner tonight. My place or yours? I smiled as I typed my response. Let's try that new farm-to-table restaurant downtown. I'm feeling like celebrating my roots tonight. His reply came immediately. Perfect. And after dinner, I have something important to ask you. My heart quickened at the implication. 6 months ago, the idea of opening myself to love again would have seemed impossible. But like the fields back home after winter's harshest freeze, my capacity for joy and connection had proven resilient beyond measure. The intercom buzzed. Maeve, Avery's here with the Henderson team for the contract signing, Ruby announced. I'll be right there, I replied, tucking my phone away. As I gathered the necessary files, my gaze fell on a small framed photograph on my desk. Not one of the old ones Sterling had returned, but a new one taken at last month's company retreat. It showed me surrounded by my executive team, all of us in casual clothes, standing before a backdrop of rolling hills reminiscent of my childhood home. My smile in the photograph was unreserved, my posture confident, my eyes clear and direct, the country girl and the CEO existing in perfect harmony. On the farm, my grandmother had taught me that the strongest plants were those that bent with the wind without breaking, that weathered drought and frost only to emerge more resilient. For 25 years, I had allowed Sterling to convince me that my rural origins were a liability to overcome rather than a source of strength to embrace. Never again. As I headed to the conference room where my daughter and our partners awaited, I thought about the journey of the past 6 months, from betrayed wife to empowered leader, from a woman who doubted her worth to one who stood firmly in her truth. Sterling had called me hillbilly trash that night at Bellamy's, never imagining his words would set me free rather than destroy me. The conference room doors opened as I approached. Avery looked up and smiled, her expression a perfect blend of professional confidence and personal pride. Mom, perfect timing. We were just about to begin. I took my place at the head of the table, surveying the faces turned expectantly toward me. Thank you all for being here today. Before we sign these agreements, I'd like to share a bit about the vision driving Holloway Enterprises forward. As I spoke about sustainable growth, ethical business practices, and community investment, I felt the last shadowy remnants of Sterling's influence fall away. The woman addressing this room was fully, unapologetically Maeve Holloway, farm girl, mother, business leader, and architect of her own destiny. Later that evening, as Griffin and I strolled along the riverfront after dinner, the spring air carried the promise of new beginnings. When he stopped beneath a flowering cherry tree and took both my hands in his, I already knew what was coming. Maeve Holloway, he said, his voice steady but vulnerable, I've admired you for years. Your intelligence, your strength, your integrity. But it's only in these past months that I have truly seen the extraordinary woman you are when freed from shadows. I love every version of you, the sophisticated businesswoman and the country girl with the unrestrained laugh. I love your kindness and your fierce determination. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life celebrating all the facets of who you are. As he knelt and presented a simple but elegant ring, tears blurred my vision. Not tears of insecurity or doubt, but of profound gratitude for the journey that had led me here. Yes, I answered without hesitation. 1,000 times, yes. Seat. 6 months after the night that had shattered my world, I stood beneath flowering trees with a man who loved me for exactly who I was, leading a company that reflected my true values, supported by a daughter who had discovered her own strength by witnessing mine. The path forward stretched before me, no longer constrained by someone else's expectations or limitations. Sterling had been wrong about everything that mattered. My rural origins weren't something to overcome. They were the very foundation of my resilience. My hillbilly heritage hadn't limited me. It had given me the authenticity and determination that ultimately saved me. As Griffin slipped the ring onto my finger and pulled me into an embrace, I laughed without restraint. the full-throated, joyful laugh of the country girl I had always been beneath the polished exterior. The laugh Sterling had tried so hard to silence. The laugh that now announced to the world that Maeve Holloway was finally, completely free. And that was just the beginning. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.